See, the honourable member for Edmonton Ellerslie is looking to join debate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure, as always, to get up and speak to the bill. I just want to be absolutely 100% clear that we are in favor of supporting shorter timelines for decisions by the AER. But of course, one of the things that I want to touch on specifically when it comes to Bill 7, Responsible Energy Development Amendment Act 2020, is the whole issue of consultations and assessments, but specifically in regards to Indigenous communities. And because I've had a fair amount of experience visiting Indigenous communities all across Alberta, and I know enough to know that, speaking to the chief and council of an Indigenous community, a nation, is not simply the only way that you can consult. In fact, it is the opinion of several members of Indigenous communities that it's the responsibility of a chief and council to take the information back to its members, back to the members of the community, and to hold discussions on what's being proposed. Now, I want to, and it's important because we're putting this in this context because, of course, we're trying to shorten the timelines, while at the same time, if we are to truly respect how Indigenous communities discern whether they want to move forward with a particular project or how they are going to be participating within a particular project, that needs to take its time as well. And I'll remind members of this House that the whole concept of chief and council was actually something established by the Indian Act, Canadian law. And it's not so much the way that the majority of Indigenous communities actually conceptualize of leadership and authority within their communities. For those who know the topic well, they will know that elders in the community play an essential role in the decision-making process. And in light of the fact that as a society we have matured enough to now know that we need to do our best for reconciliation here in the province of Alberta as a government, to reconcile with Indigenous communities because of injustices that have occurred in the past. I think that this needs to be highly considered, right? It's also an important part of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, not only the reconciliation process that we need to do as well. We need to understand that there are international laws decided upon, discerned on by Indigenous communities worldwide. And I know that perhaps not all agree with what has been stated inside of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, but that we should be doing our best as a government to make sure that we are respecting Indigenous communities fully. And again, I go back to the role of Indigenous elders within those communities, and knowing that simply reaching out to the chief of a particular nation and having a discussion, although it is legitimate, is not the only way that consultation can take place. And if we are to be fair and just in our processes, then we should strive to encourage and provide the time for Indigenous communities to actually go through a consultation process with people in their communities, right? So I know it's kind of like a catch-22. We're saying let's shorten the timelines, but we're also saying let's make sure to respect the time that is required for communities to actually have a voice at the table, and not conceptualize chief and council and Indigenous communities as all being just one homogeneous group of people. Just like we have in our society, we have people of different ideologies, different philosophies, different ways of looking, different, I just clarify and say different perspectives, you're going to get that same cross-section within Indigenous communities as well. Not all agree on, for example, what some may call development. And it's really important that we respect all the particular perspectives within Indigenous communities so that when we're moving forward as a society together, hand in hand, trying to make Alberta a better place, we're doing it where we're trying to respect the most amount of people as we possibly can within a process. And at least giving the opportunity for people to provide insight and feedback. And of course, I mean, it's a well-known perspective now that's been shared with Canadian society, or I would say is, North American society in general, that Indigenous peoples, especially traditional perspectives, choose to contemplate how a particular decision is going to affect even 7 generations down the line. And I think that this is food for thought for us as people who govern or participate in the governing process, that we should also contemplate how is this going to affect people 7 generations down the line. And that it's important for us to not only provide the time for Indigenous communities to do that themselves, but then also us to be able to contemplate that and take into consideration. So that being said, I just want to say that, for example, when we were in government, and it's something that was really near and dear to my heart, is making sure that we were putting in place the calls for action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the time. As people well know, prior to 2015, there were a number of hearings held throughout the entire country regarding truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities. Members from communities had an opportunity to come into these large general assemblies and actually share their personal and historical perspectives among these large groups of people from Indigenous and non-Indigenous backgrounds. And it was such an incredible learning opportunity for the people that participated in this process. And I think that it's important for us to do justice to not only the people who participated and dedicated their time and energy and immense efforts to going through these processes of discernment and coming up with these calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but to make sure that within our own processes and how we relate and interrelate with Indigenous communities here better stated, Indigenous nations here in the province of Alberta, that we pay respect to that process and that we make sure that we're incorporating as much as we possibly can avenues by which this can take place. And of course, it was so near and dear to my heart, and many in the Alberta NDP caucus, that while we were in government, we invested a serious amount of time and energy into making sure that Indigenous consultation was being done. And not only that, we were just saying, okay, let's do it. No, it was actually providing the space to have these conversations about how we can potentially do it. What does it look like? So that it's not a top-down approach of saying, okay, well, we're gonna consult. We're gonna provide the opportunity, and this is how it's gonna be done. No, actually working with Indigenous communities. And I want to say that, the member from Edmonton, Rutherford, did an exceptional role, did an exceptional work in connecting with so many Indigenous nations across Alberta, you know, in all treaty areas of 6, 7, and 8, visiting these communities, going and spending time not only with chief and council again, but with elders from these communities. I can tell you that, and I'm sure that many people within this House actually feel this way and think about it this way, but we respect our elders. We respect the people in our communities that came before us, and we honor the experiences that they have had. And when they speak, we listen so that we may gain insight upon how they lived their lives and how they made decisions. And of course, again, you're going to get a wide spectrum of different beliefs and ways of looking at life and the world. But it's important that we provide that opportunity. And I just wanted to speak to the fact that the member from Edmonton Rutherford, while he was the Minister of Indigenous Relations, did a phenomenal job of making sure to connect with Indigenous communities and then discuss and come up with, in concert with them, what consultation capacity to ensure that Indigenous people could participate in the very best way possible within on how we were interacting, you know, and I would say that in that nation-to-nation relationship. So it's really important that this not be swept aside, swept under the rug, that we continue to look at ways that this can be done in the most effective manner. I understand that shorter timelines are important in order to make so that we can have projects move forward in a more timely manner. But again, what we're seeing here is that we're setting arbitrary timelines. And it seems to me that that this is the government, you know, kind of setting itself up for legal challenges and potentially failures, as we have seen with the Northern Gateway or Trans Mountain. So it's important that that we take all this into consideration. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that when we were in government very early on, and thanks to us having an incredible, insightful leader and others that were leading in our government, we were able to get a number of different stakeholders from different perspectives, right? Getting Indigenous communities sitting at the table with people who are advocates of the environment, getting oil, the petroleum industry sitting at the table, all people sitting together at the table so that we could then come up with the way that we move forward. And it wasn't about pitting one group against another. No, it was a way of getting everybody to sit at the table and to discuss how we could potentially move projects forward in a respectful manner, making sure that everybody had input within the process. So at least us who are on the governing side could then take those perspectives, those insights into consideration when coming up with changes in the law and regulation as they applied, and particularly in this instance to the AER. Now, all this is being done in the context of the fact that the government now has recently rolled back or suspended a number of environmental protections. And this has been done largely without consulting Indigenous people. So here I am raising the red flag on this call and saying, you know, our country our country went through a process of making sure that